Now, copping plenty of mentions on the program today already is, I guess, the little-known National Indigenous Australian Agency, set up by the Morrison government, not by this government. Its total budget for 2022-2023 is $4.4 billion. Now, plenty of people who know a lot more about it than me say this is the Voice on steroids. So we're having the Voice already there with the National Indigenous Australian Agency with a $4.4 billion budget. Now we're going to have another layer on top of that. Added to that, as I've mentioned earlier, we have 3,000 Indigenous corporations across the country. And by the way, they're not subject to the same corporations law that normal companies are. They have their special Indigenous corporations law. CATS, as it's called. Now that leads me to a speech made by Pauline Hanson in the Senate yesterday. And just to put this in context, I have spoken to James Ashby from her office this morning about it. The letter is anonymous, but it's well crafted, and the balance of probability is it's right and correct, and it's not some sort of urban myth. So Senator Hanson got this and shared it with a broader audience in Senate yesterday. The person writing it, dated the 15th of March, says, "In recent weeks, I've seen media reports about an Aboriginal activist attempting to gain early access to the old age pension, essentially because Aboriginal people have a lower life expectancy than the rest of the Australian population. This immediately brought to mind a conversation that my wife and I overheard in a Canberra coffee shop November last year. The relevant cafe is in the Woden Town Centre near the Charles Perkins House, CPH. We subsequently learnt that CPH is the home of the National Indigenous Australians Agency, the NIAA. We're having mid-morning coffee, 6 or 7 excited and voluble people gathered at the adjoining table, talking excitedly about the list of opportunities they just developed. To clear these opportunities, the initial action list for the new Voice, if it was established, or once it was established. Now, my wife and I were gobsmacked about the most divisive ideas being discussed. After some 30 or 40 minutes, the group left the cafe and returned to their offices, I would imagine. However, one of them accidentally left a pair of A4 sheets under the table. These pages appeared to be a printout from one of those older whiteboards. The text had been handwritten. My wife gathered up the pages and returned them to the front desk of Charles Perkins' house, but I couldn't help myself. I took 2 quick photos. In light of recent events, I thought I'd forward what we found in November of 2022. 1. Job quotas. Minimum 10% appointments to the First Nations people for judges, magistrates, ADF officers, AFP, State Police Force, Corrections Department, Vice-Chancellors and Ambassadors. 2. Universities. No entry test, no fees for First Nations people. Old age pension, reduced age eligibility for First Nations people because we die younger. Public housing, First Nations people to have first preference of all vacant public housing across the states. Sport and music, entry fees reduced by 50% for First Nations people for any event on public land. Beaches and national parks, all beaches, national parks to be the property of the relevant tribe, non-First Nations people to be charged to use those beaches. Mining royalties, same as for water. Rivers and streams to become property of the relevant tribe, and fees for water consumption to be paid relevant tribe. Income tax, First Nations people to be 50% of the normal rate. Liquor licensing, all new liquor licences across Australia to be vetted by the Voice. And so it goes on. Now, it was tabled by Pauline Hanson, One Nation leader, and when I said, well, this could be just, someone being mischievous and sending this to Pauline Hanson and getting her to table it and say, after she's tabled it, come out and say, yeah, there you go. We got her. So they said they did some research, and one of the claims, and that was a claim about beaches and national parks, it's already happened. There was a story published on the 18th of March. Residents are unhappy, claiming they're unable to access a nearby beach after an Indigenous community was granted native title rights over the strip of sand. Access to Burrum Heads Beach on Queensland's Fraser Coast, north of Brisbane, was closed off by the local Indigenous people after a native title grant of land and ocean in 2019. The native title determination includes a section designated as exclusive use, including some coastal foreshores and a car park which separates Burrum Head residents from the beach. Branches and mesh now cover the entrance to the car park and thoroughfare to the beach. The restricted access to the beach comes after reports of a dispute over trespassing during Australia Day celebrations. the People's Connection from the Butch-Sheller group, their mob, to Land and Sea recognised 2019 Special Federal Court determination was handed down. Now, the local MP, Keith Pitt, federal MP, claimed a number of concerned Burham Heads residents contacted his office about an area of land under native title. I contacted both the local state MP, the Fraser Coast Regional Council, about the concerns to find out what steps are being taken to address the situation. The council advised it's working with the state government to understand how the land can be used and by whom. So, I mean, one of the claims that is allegedly made on this A4 piece of paper is already happening. It's not waiting for the voice, it's already happened via the federal court. And I go back to these 3,000 Indigenous corporations. If you own a company or you're part of a company that's registered with ASIC, you come under the Corporations Act, regulated by the Australian Securities Investments Commission, known as ASIC. If, however, you are one of the 3,000 Indigenous corporations, they're registered under what's called the CATSIS Act, regulated by the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations. The Registrar is an independent office holder and supported by the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations. So we've already got two forms of dealing with matters in relation to corporate law. You've got the non-Indigenous being dealt with by ASIC, and you've got 3,000 corporations, Indigenous corporations, dealt in an entirely separate way. It seems strange in the extreme.